Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
Today, August 19 is exactly 30 years since a very unusual coup took place in Moscow, in the Soviet Union, in then Soviet Union. Unusual, one, because it failed immediately, it failed within 2 days. Unusual also because it brought about change in its failure that would not be expected normally when an attempted coup fails. When an attempted coup fails, you would think that the side that succeeded in putting down the coup, that side would emerge stronger. But in this case, that side actually emerged even weaker. That side disintegrated, and also following that up, the country, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, USSR, also disintegrated. In the next 5 months, there was no USSR. 19th August 1991 for this was this, and I can say so, and that's the reason we will also be doing a little bit of storytelling today. I can also have that boast that reporters like to have, which is that I was there when this happened, and I covered this, and I traveled through what was then Soviet Union, and looking at some of the republics, how things were falling apart there, particularly Ukraine and the Baltics in Lithuania, and then traveled through all of Eastern Europe to see how it was unraveling, that is Romania, Czech Republic, East Germany, etc., etc. Anyway, we are confining ourselves to what happened in the Soviet Union. So what reminded me to talk about this today was an article in The Guardian, which Amogh Rohmetra, who is a young fellow who these days is among the small, brilliant team that's been helping me with research, he forwarded an op-ed article from The Guardian to me by Raphael Behr. He is a well-known op-edist or opinion writer in The Guardian. And that article said how 30 years back a coup took place. It was put down in a way by democratic forces, but how that has not been such a good advertisement for democracy over the past 30 years. Looks like the world has failed itself on democratization, and actually at this point democracy is not as good an order as it should have been by now, 30 years after that major cataclysmic event. Now, I will also tell you that it was a cataclysmic event, and that is the headline also when I wrote this story, and you will see some of these things running on my screen. I told you there will be some storytelling today. When I wrote this story in India Today, it was in the 15th September 1991 issue of India Today. So 15th September means the issue must have been out on 1st September. So this failed coup was 19th of August, right? So the same issue. The headline of that story is cataclysmic change has convulsed the Soviet Union, and the strap said, and as Boris Yeltsin seizes center stage, it is clear that the superpowers' days as a communist monolith are over. So this story must have been written around 25th or 26th or 27th of August, because that's the lead time you get for a fortnightly magazine. So we knew what was going to happen. Now, we are revisiting this, and we are also talking about what implications it has for the rest of the world, for Russia, also for the general esteem in which democracy and democratization is held. We are also looking at how some parts of the former Soviet Union democratized quite nicely. Some did not. Some liked democracy, some did not. And before I go there, because that will take some political analysis and serious decluttering, I will read a line to you. It's a quote, and I will tell you before we end who spoke this line, but meanwhile you guess who spoke this line. And the quote is, "The wind blows, the dogs bark, the caravan moves on." हवा चलती है, आंधी चलती है, कुत्ते भौंकते हैं, कारवां चलता रहता है. The wind blows, the dogs bark, and the caravan moves on. So you have to guess who said this and what context, and did the person prove right or wrong. Anyway, so coming back to what happened in Moscow on 19th of August. On 19th of August, there was an establishment, deep establishment, or the deep state within the Soviet Union. That was the Communist Party, that was the ideologues communist ideologues, that was also people in the intelligence agency, that is KGB. They were also ultra nationalists of various kinds who thought the direction in which Mikhail Gorbachev was taking the country was not right, because Mikhail Gorbachev was opening up the country. You remember perestroika, that is restructuring, glasnost, that is openness. So he had started all that stuff, and for the conservatives of Communist Party, that was anathema. So 19th of August, suddenly, and this is when people thought that Gorbachev was fine and Soviet Union was changing. Suddenly, stories came out saying that Gorbachev was in ill health and was giving up his position as the General Secretary of the party, or the all-powerful leader of the Soviet Union. Now, that was a lie. That was a lie. Lies were often told in Soviet Union's media. Lies were told on behalf of the government, as they might be told now in the Chinese media, because this was all state-run media. So this was a lie. So these coup leaders came out, and suddenly people woke up seeing tanks rolling down the main avenues of Moscow. So we landed there. As the story broke, we left the same day. Fortunately, there was a flight. In fact, Air India those days used to fly a leased Russian aircraft, an IL-62, with 4 engines at the back. It was a very unusual configuration for the aircraft, where seat belts didn't work, but aircraft was quite overpowered. In fact, you could feel it. Anyway, so we landed there, and there were tanks on the streets, and there was a lot of mayhem. By next day, however, things had begun to change. Gorbachev was not even in Moscow. Gorbachev was actually recovering or resting in his dacha in Crimea. Crimea, that later became part of Ukraine, has lately been annexed by Vladimir Putin. Who else? Nevertheless, he was in his dacha in Crimea, but Boris Yeltsin, who was his lieutenant and now a strong man in the Moscow system, he led the fight back against the coup. He threw the coup leaders out. He cleared up the coup within 48 hours in front of the big building of parliament, which is called the White House for some reason in Moscow. On the terrace of it, while some tanks still stood here and there just because they had not been cleared yet, or maybe also the crews wanted to watch some fun, there were rock groups, pro-democracy rock groups performing in celebration that the coup had been defeated. Now, when that coup happened, or when that attempt to take back the power of the Communist Party happened, it was also an attempt at restoring the Soviet Union to what it was, a communist dictatorship with a deep sense of militarism. That made a lot of people very nostalgic, particularly people who had been friends or partners with the Soviet Union, and they thought, good days are back again. Gorbachev was changing too much. So mistakes were made everywhere. At the Indian embassy, Alfred Gonzalez was our ambassador, and I could see that there was some sense of jubilation in his mind and his colleagues that now, at least those days when you could call Politburo members directly to get your stuff done for India, those times will come back now. Gorbachev was whittling it down. In Delhi, Narasimha Rao, who was India's Prime Minister, who had just reformed India's economy with his big budget, etc., he made a completely poorly thought out statement where he said, this is a warning to reformers in a hurry, which means Gorbachev was a reformer in a hurry. So a lot of people thought this is it, Soviet Union is back to normal, but that did not happen. Coup leaders and the coup was defeated within 2 days. It so happened later that people who had led the coup, they were then let off later and not prosecuted and not punished, etc., because the whole country went into a kind of forgiveness and repair mode. But they were defeated. A democratic force came in, but that democratic force, one, was not going to be Gorbachev. Soon enough, Gorbachev was out. He was out, replaced by Yeltsin, and this was a quick succession. So Yeltsin came in. The other thing that happened was the breakup of the Soviet Union started. So as we were there, September 15, I think, Ukraine had its referendum saying they want to be free. The 3 Baltic countries, that is tiny countries, but the closest to Europe and most Europeanized parts of Soviet Union, and the parts of Soviet Union which had never fundamentally accepted being part of the Union, that is Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia. They had pretty much announced their independence, and they were close to getting recognition from some Western countries. This is the time when Azerbaijan, Armenia, these sparks at first started, and then Moldova, and then Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, all of them started. So of the 15 republics that made the USSR, Russian Federation remained as the inheritor of what used to be USSR, what used to be the core of USSR, and what used to be the Russia earlier, and this was now called Russian Federation. Now Russian Federation was about 50% of the population of the entire USSR and 60% of the area. Remember, they have all that Siberia there, that is part of the Russian Federation. So Russian Federation still is a very large country. A lot of it is in Asia, a lot of it is in Europe. So that country remained, and then came big changes. And once again, as the changes came, people thought across the world, and that is also the burden of this Guardian article by Raphael Baer. I will share the article with you. People across the world thought that this is now democratic spirit, this is irrevocable, this is irreversible, this is not going to change. At the same time, we have a situation today that Russia is ruled by a strongman almost forever, that is Vladimir Putin, who says that the breakup of the Soviet Union in 1991, 30 years ago, was the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the 20th century. Now, this is not something with which a lot of the members of the old USSR would agree, because most of them are happy to be independent republics in their own right. Although USSR was supposed to be a voluntary union, it was never a voluntary union. It was a voluntary union with the right to secession. But who would talk the right to secession in a communist dictatorship? So it was never going to happen. Why did this go wrong in the Soviet Union? And then you see, why did democracy grow beautifully, say, in the Baltics, right? In the small Baltic countries, to some extent in Ukraine, but grew most poorly, say, in Belarusia, which is now Belarus, and we talked about Belarus a couple of times because they have a very Soviet style dictator even now. He's a favorite of Putin's. He's crushed all dissidents. He has stolen an election completely brazenly. He's exiled the person who dared to contest against him in the election. He has stopped planes in mid-flight and forced them to land and taken out his dissidents and put them under arrest. He has not privatized his industry, etc. So he's continued, he is in some ways the inheritor of the old Soviet system. So why did these various different changes took place? Now, why did democracy fail in Russia? Putin is elected, but this is an elected autocracy, and with every passing year, Putin's become more powerful, more dictatorial, and his challengers have vanished. One of them even ended up with deadly poison in his underwear, right? We know that story. So what exactly happened in Russia? Now the analysis on that and all the reading I do, and I see parallels in India, I see parallels in other democracies. Democratization doesn't mean that people put their nationalism or sense of identity aside. So say Lithuania becomes a republic, it's a democracy, all of Lithuania is intact. So national pride, nationalism is intact, it is now Lithuanian nationalism, that is the only difference. But Russia, when Russia loses 14 of its republics, then for the people of Russia who were so proud that we had such a large country, they still have a large country, but that is now like this. They don't like it. They took pride in the fact that they had so many republics or so many members or so many components in their federation that they were such a large superpower. So one, they felt a sense of territory, then they felt a sense of their countrymen, people, they've gone away and left us, and third, they felt the sense that their nation had declined in comprehensive national power. or gross national power, because Russian Federation, whatever it was not even a pale shadow of the mighty Soviet Union. It wasn't this second superpower almost rivaling America. It now needed food aid. In fact, soon enough in the next 3 years, it was seeking food aid from the world. There was massive inflation. There was a breakdown of the economy, breakdown of law and order. Many problems happened. So all that played on the national self-esteem. So in fact, if I quote a line from Raphael Baer, he says, look, from that to now, if you see even Biden's rise, there isn't that much to comment for democracy right now. The democracy is brilliant. That democracy, if democracy brings in bad aberrations, it also fixes them. So Trump was a bad aberration. Democracy institutions worked, so they fixed it by defeating Trump and bringing in Biden. But he also says that the way Biden is performing so far, it looks like his rise is more a respite from malady. These are his words, are more a respite from malady than a remedy. So if when you look at all this, you think that somewhere the process of democratization has not taken into account the fact that human beings, besides democratic rights, also have other urges, strong urges and motivations. One is nationalism. So remember that anybody who says today that Article 370 should be restored will be in trouble. Anybody who says give autonomy to this and this, this and that, anybody who questions the current maps of India, even those territories which are not under Indian control, is in deep trouble. He can fight or she can fight elections maybe in some university campus. No place else in India will the person have a chance, because democratic urge is linked with nationalism, identity, and identity includes religion as well. So 26 December 1991, the USSR was dissolved. Within 5 months, as I told you, of this failed coup, it ended. And then there was a lot of worries in the world. The worries were that so many of these republics have nuclear weapons stationed there, or have people in the armed forces that operate nuclear weapons. So there was a Lisbon Protocol signed between the Russians and the rest, among all the republics, whereby they said that we'll all cede all nuclear weapons and weapons of mass destruction to Russia. So Russia became the inheritor of the nuclear legacy. So what happened? Russia now was territorially a pale shadow of its past. In population, it was a paler shadow of the past. In economic power, it was really nothing compared to the past. It was for some time a basket case, but it had all the nukes of the previous Soviet Union and a lot of the army of the previous Soviet Union. So since then, what's been driving the Russian power in the world is its military power, its military industrial complex, and its nuclear weapons. Even today, its nuclear weapons missile rival America's, and because it's a friend of China's right now, it's inclined towards China, it balances the American power. In fact, it overbalances the American power in conjunction with China. So this is what remained with Russia. Now for people of Russia, it is natural for them to ask. You can't fault them for asking, what did democracy give me? Democracy gave me, it got me rid of communist dictatorship, but it lost my country so much power. My national pride has been hurt. My country is much smaller. Am I living that much better? Maybe I could have lived even better. Whose case is it that I would not have lived better? And that is the reason, because now many of the Democrats in Russia would say, what democracy? The same man wins all the time. One day becomes prime minister, one day becomes president, he becomes prime minister again, can do what he wants. It's a one-man rule. So how is it any different in terms of democratization from the Communist Party rule? At least in that case, there was a Politburo, there was a central committee. Now even those institutions of a communist dictatorship are not there. Now Gorbachev, as we know, he gave over power, he turned over power to Yeltsin. Now Yeltsin continued on for quite some time. 1993, September 21, Parliament was dissolved. And once again a challenge came up to Yeltsin, and Yeltsin again sent his army to the White House, and there was a heavy firing, nearly 200 people were killed, but he was again able to restore order. And then we know what happened in Russia. Then we know that Chechnya crisis broke out in 1994. Yeltsin fought there for 2 years, and it continued fighting. There was a siege that his army laid around Grozny, the capital of Chechnya. It led to 25,000 civilians being killed, and yet he was not able to subdue Chechnya. So that also showed the people of Russia that meanwhile the great Russian army had also weakened. So once again that support that democracy was going to give us freedoms and make us stronger was going away, because it was seen as if democracy was giving us some freedoms, but it was sapping all the strengths of our country, including the army. And then a whole bunch of people happened. Primakov came as prime minister for some time. Then Stepashin came. Sergei Stepashin was a former FSB, that is the successor to KGB chief, a bit like Putin. And December 31, 99, Yeltsin quit. And then we know what happened. Then Putin rose, and the rest is relatively recent history that we know. So this is an example, as you see, this is an example of how a country changed on the promise of democracy. A superpower changed on the promise of democracy. But democracy did not keep its real promise, that is taking the country forward, as democracy might have done, say, for many Western countries. But take them forward, make them first world countries, improve quality of life, improve freedoms. On the other hand, democracy got reduced into a kind of elected autocracy. In fact, it is the most extreme elected autocracy, way ahead of Turkey's Erdogan's. And also, it led to the complete destruction of Soviet Union's comprehensive national power, and that is something a lot of people don't like. And that is what a lot of the people elsewhere who speak against democracy, the Chinese Communist Party, for example, that is the argument they use. Chinese Communist Party's argument always is, every country chooses its own democracy. We also have democracy. Why are you giving us your model? Because that model might make us weaker. And your motive in transferring that model to us might be to make us weaker. Now that is the message that Taliban have now given to America and its backers, say, in Afghanistan. Now we don't know if people of Afghanistan are with them. Looks like, at least in the cities, they are not with them. But it also tells you that nationalism, religion, identity are very strong forces, and you cannot democratize unless you have institutional structures that will outlast the pressures that sudden democratization can bring. That Russia did not have, and that's the reason Russia has gone in this direction. So on which note I shall tell you 3 quotes. First of all, I will tell you something that John Cohen, who was the Time magazine bureau chief in Moscow at that point. In fact, he lent me his good offices so I could go to his office and write my stories and also file them on the Time magazine system, because India did not as yet have an email kind of system that could receive stories. So I filed it to his headquarters in New York in Time magazine, and from there the stories were relayed to Delhi, to Time magazine office, and then to India Today office. But there's a line that he spoke. He said, and I take it from my story in India Today, and I'm sharing the screenshots of those stories, and he said, after 3 years here, it looks like to me, he said, it seems to me that after 3 years here in Moscow, I am starting a new assignment in a new country, because that was a time when busts and statues of all great communist leaders were being pulled out, and some old timers were crying on the street saying, you are pulling out Trotsky's bust. He's the founder of the Great Red Army. The Great Red Army won us the Great Patriotic War, that is the Second World War. How can you do it? But that was happening all over the Soviet Union at that point. The second was a quote from General Jonas Grechus, again from my story then. Jonas Grechus, just 45 years old, who had just become the chief of Lithuanian army, chief of staff Lithuanian army. Lithuania is a tiny Baltic country. He said it's a move from communism to democracy and from militarism to pacifism. So you can see in his mood that he thought things were going to work out, that this was a small country with its nationalism intact, In fact, its nationalism liberated from the larger Soviet ultranationalism and was now happy to be in its democratic skin. And third is the quote that I used earlier on. I will tell you who said so, and that is, the wind blows, the dogs bark, the caravan moves on. आंधी आती है, कुत्ते भौंकते हैं, कारवां चलता रहता है. That was spoken around that time by none else than Mikhail Gorbachev. Except that in this case, the way the caravan moved was not exactly the way he might have expected it to move with his reforms and his democratization.